Yeah, and good afternoon, this is Rosemary, Access Board again, and we do have captioning and we do have interpreters, so we're just waiting for a few more members. Other than that, we are good to go. Access Board is ready.
Madam Chair, I think we should be good to get started.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Access Board's May meeting of the full board. My name is Taryn Williams. I am chair of the Access Board and also the official member representing the Department of Labor. First on our agenda for this public meeting will be a roll call, and I will turn it over to Rosemary to do the roll call. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Rosemary Benalis, Access Board. Members, when you hear your name, say present. Starting with Mr. Elver Arisa Silva.
Present.
HHS Allison Barkoff. Karen Breitmeyer.
Good afternoon. Karen Breitmeyer is present.
Department of Defense Gilbert Cisneros.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Randy Cooper, proxy to the chair. Over.
Thank you. Department of Justice Kristen Clark.
Here.
Heather Dowdy.
Present.
Gregory Farabak.
Present.
Dr. Amy Hamraoui.
Present.
Hannah Ibanez.
Present.
General Services Administration Katie Kale.
Present.
Alexis Kashar.
Present.
Postal Service Benjamin Kuo. K.R. Liu.
Present.
Benjamin Nadelsky.
Present.
Department of Education, Katie Nees.
This is Tanya Steller, proxy to Catherine Neese, Assistant Secretary.
Okay, Veterans Administration, Michael Parrish.
Mark Gower, liaison, present.
Okay, Victor Pineda. Madeline Ruvalo.
Present.
Deb Ryan. Karen Tamley.
Present.
I'm sorry, was that Deborah I heard? No, okay. Department of Labor, Taryn Williams.
Present.
Housing and Urban Development, Janine Warden. I see Rex is muted, but.
Rex Space, liaison, is present.
Thank you. Department of Commerce, Jeremy Pelter. Department of Interior.
Sloan Trail, liaison, present.
Okay, and Department of Transportation.
John Day, DOT liaison, is here.
Okay, and do I see a Jeremy Pelter? Your mic is, you are present. I see you. Okay. All right, did I forget anybody? Madam Chair, we do have a quorum.
Great, thank you. Next, we will move to the approval of the January 12th, 2022 draft meeting minutes. Members will note that we are only voting on the January 2022 meeting minutes, as the March 2022 meeting was canceled and therefore no report. Is there a motion to approve the January 12th, 2022 draft meeting minutes?
I move acceptance of the minutes.
Second.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you, Karen. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstained? The motion carries. Next, we'll move to the introduction of our new public members. Several weeks ago, President Biden appointed 8 new public members to the board and reappointed Gregory Farabak. I will now call on each one of the new members for brief self-introductions. I'll start with Elver Arisa Silva.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Elver Arisa Silva, originally from Colombia, but now based in Washington, D.C., a professional with more than 20 years experience combined in human and social services and the food science industry, advocate and self-advocate, interacting with diverse cultural background, but mostly working with and on behalf of people with disabilities and their families, always seeking opportunities on the national front to promote equity and that the accessibility be fully accessible. Thank you.
Thank you. And Heather Dowdy.
Good afternoon. My name is Heather Dowdy. I'm glad to be here today. I'm currently the Director of Product Accessibility at Netflix. With a background in engineering, it's been my pleasure to work with the disability community to build inclusive technology. Thank you.
Thank you. Gregory Fairback.
Yes, good afternoon. I'm Greg Ferrybach. I'm an attorney in Indianapolis, representing the state of Indiana. Pleased to be reappointed by President Biden, originally appointed by President Obama. And I'm also a 36-year practicing lawyer and serve as a distinguished fellow at Ball State University. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. And Dr. Amy Hamrahi.
Hello, my name is Amy Hamrai. I use they, them pronouns. I am an associate professor of medicine, health, and society at Vanderbilt University, where I do accessibility research, and I also direct the Critical Design Lab, which is a collaborative of disabled designers. And I'm also the author of the book, Building Access, Universal Design, and the Politics of Disability. Thank you.
Thank you. And Hannah Ibanez.
Hello, I'm Hannah. I'm a social justice attorney licensed in the federal courts, the state of California, and the state of Florida. I currently live and work in Los Angeles for Inner City Law Center, which is a nonprofit law firm based out of Skid Row, serving marginalized communities in Los Angeles. And prior to that, I served as a public defender.
Thank you, Hannah. Alexis Ander Kashar.
Good afternoon to you all. I am Alexis Kashar. Just making sure that the accessibility services are in place. I am based in New York and am a long-time attorney in the spaces of accessibility and special education. I'm also an entrepreneur, and my pronouns are she, her. I'm very much looking forward to serving on the Access Board and providing services to the public. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we'll move to KR Liu.
Hello, everyone. I'm KR Liu. My pronouns are she, her. I'm currently the head of brand accessibility at Google. I have over 25 years of experience in inclusive design and brand marketing, specifically around people with disabilities. And I'm very happy to be here and be joining you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Benjamin Nadolski.
Hi, my name is Benjamin Adolsky. I'm originally from Tennessee, but now I'm based in Philadelphia. I'm a white man with medium cut hair, a facial hair, a beard, and a mustache. I have green eyes, and I am a former teacher turned law student and business student at the University of Pennsylvania.
Thank you. And Madeline Rose Rubelo.
Hello, I'm Madeline Ruvalo. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a transportation planner at the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency, where I work on the accessible services team on active transportation and emerging mobility projects and programs. I'm happy to be here with you all.
Thank you. And a new member representing the Department of Commerce is Jeremy Pelter. He's newly appointed as the CFO and Assistant Secretary for Administration. And as I understand it, just started this position this past Monday. So Jeremy?
Hi, Jeremy Pelter, acting CFO and Assistant Secretary for Administration. I want to make sure I add that qualifier. Very excited to be with the group today. Rejoining the department from one of our bureaus, and this is day 3. So getting caught up. I greatly appreciate Monique and the team here at Commerce working so hard to get me as quickly up to speed as I could ahead of this meeting, and look forward to the long-term engagement. Pronouns he, him, and excited to be here.
Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you, and another warm welcome to all of our new members. We'll now move to our guest speaker for today, Kristen Clark, Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights at the U.S. Department of Justice. Ms. Clark leads the Justice Department's federal civil rights enforcement efforts and works to uphold the civil and constitutional rights of all who live in America. A.G. Clark is a lifelong civil rights lawyer who has spent her entire career in public service. I will now turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Taryn, for the introduction. I am so very honored to join all of you today. As Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Rights Division, a core part of my role is overseeing the Justice Department's work to protect and safeguard the rights of people with disabilities. I'm privileged that my role also allows me to join you as a member of the Access Board, and pleased to have the opportunity to contribute to the board's critical work. I know that the close relationship between our sister agencies is critical as we all work together to implement our federal disability rights laws. I want to recognize the board's leadership. Your leadership in establishing accessibility guidelines and standards is truly crucial to our shared mission of ensuring equal opportunity for people with disabilities across our country. On a day-to-day basis, much of the collaborative work between the board and the Civil Rights Division is led by our dedicated team of lawyers and support staff in the Disability Rights section. Many of them are with us today, and I'm grateful for their work maintaining a strong relationship with the board in order to advance our agency's mutual goals. I also just want to take a moment to introduce Jennifer Mathis, who joined the Civil Rights Division as a Deputy Assistant Attorney General at the end of last year. She has dedicated her career to advancing disability rights and has worked at the Bazelon Center for Mental Health Law, the Disabilities Law Project, and the EEOC. We're truly fortunate to have her on our team in the division. I also want to take a brief moment to thank the board's executive director, Sachin Pavitran, for inviting me to share a few brief remarks today. It was a pleasure sitting down with him a few months ago, and I'm very delighted to join you again today as we welcome the board's newest public members. The Civil Rights Division is honored to have the opportunity to work with each and every one of you. The diversity of experience and expertise reflected in the full board membership truly strengthens the board's ability to perform its vital role of ensuring access for all people with disabilities in our country. Today, I want to take just a brief moment to talk about precisely that, the importance of protecting and safeguarding the rights of all people with disabilities. Many people with disabilities are likely to also be members of other historically underserved or marginalized communities. All too often, this reality means that people face compounding levels of discrimination. As President Biden stated in his executive order on advancing racial equity, quote, "Our country faces converging economic, health, and climate crises that have exposed and exacerbated inequities. And to advance equal opportunity for all people with disabilities in the face of these challenges, we must remain alert and attuned to the ways that disability discrimination can intersect with and exacerbate other forms of discrimination." The Access Board has proven to be a bold and committed partner in this work. For instance, last year, the board identified a need to improve the accessibility of federal buildings where people from communities with high incidences of disability receive in-person services. These efforts were undertaken in response to the president's call for federal agencies to assess whether underserved communities were facing systemic barriers to benefiting from agencies' policies and programs. Many of these facilities serve American Indians, Alaskan Natives, and other historically marginalized communities known to have higher incidences of disability. The board's work is essential to ensuring that all community members have an equal opportunity to receive the services they seek from our federal government. The department has shared this commitment to ensuring accessibility for underserved communities and the Civil Rights Division's efforts in voting, housing, education, including the school to prison pipeline, and criminal justice all underscore the need to redress systemic barriers to access for underserved communities. By way of example, last year, the Justice Department secured settlement agreements with 2 correctional institutions to resolve complaints that their facilities and programs were inaccessible. Incarcerated people with disabilities are more likely to identify as people of color, and inaccessible facilities and programs can exacerbate existing inequalities. We also know that accessibility barriers can pose physical dangers and prevent people with disabilities from participating in important programs, which could otherwise lead to early release opportunities, counseling, and employment training that could be proved to be helpful when people re-enter society. The department's settlements ensure access to critical educational, counseling, and recreational programs, and physical access to visitation areas like libraries and medical facilities. They require compliance with the architectural accessibility guidelines issued by the Access Board and adopted as standards by the department. These settlements are just one example of how the department and the board's joint efforts complement each other to protect the rights of people with disabilities in all circumstances. The department has also worked to ensure that people with disabilities who have interacted with the justice system do not face discrimination on their path to reentry. We have brought multiple enforcement actions to address discrimination against people using prescribed FDA-approved medications for opioid use disorder, including state court supervision programs. And in April, we published guidance explaining that the Americans with Disabilities Act prohibits discrimination against people who are in treatment or recovery from opioid use disorder. The Justice Department remains committed to ensuring that people with disabilities who are incarcerated or under court supervision have an equal opportunity to pursue a healthy and fulfilling road to reentry. Just as historic marginalization can compound the discrimination faced by many people with disabilities, so too can the contemporary challenges. The COVID-19 pandemic has been a devastating case in point. As brick and mortar locations shuttered over the course of the pandemic, we witnessed many of our most important transactions moving online. And we know that in many cases that switch from in-person to virtual interactions has become permanent. Healthcare resources are among the most important tools to be found online. For many, online scheduling portals are the first step toward receiving life-saving vaccines and boosters. I'm proud to share that since November, the department has secured 5 settlement agreements with pharmacies and supermarket chains that offer vaccines. These settlement agreements are about ensuring that their portals are accessible, including for people who need to use screen reader software or keyboards to navigate web pages. The department has also published guidance on web accessibility under the ADA. That guidance offers plain language and user-friendly explanations to help ensure that it can be followed by people without a legal or technical background. As the Access Board has demonstrated through its leadership in issuing the Section 508 standards for the technology and websites of federal agencies, as well as its current work on the accessibility of innovations like self-service transaction machines, technological accessibility is truly crucial to ensuring that no one is lost in the digital divide. Indeed, the department and Access Board have partnered to protect the rights of people with disabilities in virtually every aspect of day-to-day life. In voting, the department issued guidance in February on how to ensure that ballot drop boxes are accessible so that voters with mobility disabilities have an equal opportunity to participate in our democratic process. The guidance helps ensure that our local election officials are complying with the ADA's accessibility standards. We also secured an agreement in March with the clerk's office in Travis County, Texas, to ensure that the county provides accessible polling places for people with disabilities. At the same time, the Access Board plays a critical role in voting access as a member of the Election Assistance Commission's committee, which develops voluntary guidelines for voting systems that help ensure that those systems are accessible to voters with disabilities. And I know that the Access Board and the Justice Department have both been working on the important subject of accessible medical care. The board has addressed voluntary standards for medical and diagnostic equipment, including equipment that facilitates transfer from mobility aids like wheelchairs. These standards have informed the department's thinking as we have worked to remedy specific instances of discrimination. The department has sought to ensure access to medical care in other ways. After determining that a hospital discriminated against a deaf patient who was in labor, the department obtained an agreement requiring that hospital to ensure that it provides effective communication to those in its care. And earlier this year, the department filed proposed consent decrees in its cases involving 2 doctors accused of refusing to provide medical care to a patient because of the patient's HIV status. Looking ahead, we are proud to continue to collaborate with the Access Board. Right now, each of our agencies is working hard on rulemaking to ensure that public rights of way, like sidewalks and curb ramps, are accessible to all. While this work is underway, we're also using our enforcement authority. including an inaction against the city of Chicago for failing to provide people with vision disabilities equal access to pedestrian safety information at city intersections. These efforts on the part of both of our agencies are truly critical to ensuring that people with disabilities are able to safely and easily reach the places they need to visit each day. Across every facet of day-to-day life, our agencies have worked together to ensure equal access and opportunity for all in our communities. I'm proud of the impact that we're having and very excited about the work that we'll achieve together in the road ahead. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for the remarks and for your leadership and the partnership across the Department of Justice, including with our friend Jennifer Mathis. Thank you. So now we'll move to the Executive Director's Report. And so I will turn it over to Sachin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Assistant Attorney General, for your remarks. Appreciate the partnership we have with the Department of Justice and your leadership in directing civil rights for all. First of all, I do want to recognize all the new board members that has joined us since the appointment by President Biden. We had a very productive last couple of days. I've enjoyed hearing the comments and remarks made by our new board members. I'm excited for the future of the direction the new board members are going to lead at this agency. With that, I want to turn to recognizing few of the board members that are outgoing, that has been part of the Access Board for many years. Some of them have joined us today. There's 5 individuals I want to recognize for their service and for the many years they've been part of the agency. One is Mr. Mark Guthrie, who served both under the Clinton administration and the Obama administration. Then Mr. Pat Cannon, who similarly served under the Clinton administration and the Obama administration. And then we have Mr. Chris Hart, who was appointed under the Obama administration, and Mr. Howard Rosenblum, again appointed under the Obama administration, and Mr. Matt McAuliffe, who was appointed under the Obama administration. I've had the opportunity to serve with these 5 gentlemen over the last decade as a member of the board when my role was different from what I hold right now, and been able to get to know them personally, but also been able to do a lot of work that advances accessibility. I want to give an opportunity for these outgoing board members to make some brief remarks to the public and the members of the board, and also to recognize them for the great work they have done to advance accessibility. Let's start off with Mr. Chris Hart. Chris?
Okay, thank you, Sachin. I will not promise to be very brief, but I will try to be brief. I think first off, since Dave Carosi is here, all of us owe a debt of gratitude to your predecessor, Dave Carosi, for his guidance, his wisdom, and I know personally I would not be on the board if it were not for Dave. After I turned him down to work for him, he said, well, next best thing, let's try to get you on the board. So I have had a wonderful experience working with the board's staff since 2011. And I want to start off and say thank you most especially to Gina Ellis and Rose Marie announcements. For all you new board members, you are going to quickly learn that the board does not work without data and without roads. Data will figure out everything you need for vouchers, travel, all that, and she'll bail you out when you get stuck somewhere. And roads is ubiquitous. We could not survive without roads. I also want to, of course, Saxon, who we nominated 2 years ago to take over from Dave. And I want to also thank Charles for their IT support. And of course, Bill Barton and Scott Winley. We've been a tag team for so many years on so many issues. And that really turns to the board has a critical role. This really is not political. And this really is best addressed by consensus. And the board operates by consensus. That said, the board has a lot of work ahead of it, and I want to highlight a couple areas where I hope I can continue to be useful to the board. First off, my former Secretary of Transportation, who I know and worked for off and on for 20 years, is the assistant head of federal highway. And so as we get down the road with pedestrian rights away, if I can be help with Stephanie and folks, I would be more than pleased to do that. The other piece, of course, is transit. As you know, we have a lot of work to be done in transit. The current section in ADAC is woefully short of details. And in fact, even our rail crossing guidance for detectable warnings does not work in light rail, street rail conditions. So we have a lot of work to do. And to that end, as you do your vehicle design guidelines, if I am the MBTA can be assistance and can present to you what we are doing in Boston, we would welcome that opportunity to do so. Finally, and I know Ken Brittmeyer is going to thank me for saying this. We still have work to do to update our reference standards and to address bathrooms as well as cycle track and sidewalk conflict issues. So there is plenty of work to be done as new board members, and your task is, frankly, to help take some of the burden off of a very small staff and perhaps get back to what the board used to do 20 years ago and actively write some of the rules as first draft to help the staff move that process along. with that, I want to say thank you again to Saxon and all the staff. It's been a true honor to serve my country and to remember that disability can happen to anyone and at any time and at any place in their lives. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate your service over the years, and thanks for everything you continue to do. Next, I believe he's here, Mr. Matthew McCall. Matt, are you on?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I know Sarge for nearly 20 years, so he and I grew up together in the same circles. So Sarge and I'm very proud of you from coming all the way from Utah to DC. It's been a pleasure to watch you grow over time, sir. So yeah. First of all, I want to extend my greatest appreciation to Mr. Albert Silva. Albert and I know each other. He's actually replacing me on the board. So Albert, I wish you the very best. As you served as a public member on the United States Act Board. It's been a tremendous honor serving on the Act Board since 2011, when I was appointed along with Chris and Deborah and Karen Braymeyer. So we've been together for quite some time. So I also want to extend my greatest appreciation to the United States Act Board staff. We are so many folks that are within the office, but I want to give my greatest appreciation to Jeff. So Jeff does a lot of work with the budget. I've been serving as the financial chair for the board since 2011. I've stayed in that position. Part of the reason why I like staying in that serving as the finance chair is that that's where a lot of the authority comes from. Feel the financial resources to do some of the stuff that the Act Board has done over the past 11 years. We've come a very long way in terms of promoting accessibility. One of the greatest achievements that sticks in my mind came when the Affordable Care Act charged the Act Board for establishing the voluntary medical the voluntary standards for the medical durable equipment, which pretty much states that all medical durable equipment inside a doctor's office should be fully accessible. And as many of you know, our community has been impacted on a very negative way, simply because we have not been able to get the same quality of healthcare because we can't transfer successfully or safely onto an exam table, or there wasn't an accessible reading machine and stuff like that. So the fact that the Affordable Care Act charged the Act Board for solely establishing those standards for the medical durable equipment inside a doctor's office, that meant so much to me because I lost friends to cancer and so forth, and it was solely because they couldn't get diagnosed effectively because the office was simply not fully accessible to them. And so we made some great strides in emergency preparedness. The fact that we created standards for transportable housing was critical with all the hurricanes occurring and fires. Having accessible transportable housing is critical to making sure that people feel safe in transitional housing, particularly if they lost their homes. And of course, we're heading to that time where we are a lot of the assistive technology is advancing so quickly, and so I realized that the export is part of the federal government, and sometimes creating standards may be a slow process when all the assistive technology is advancing, but Sachkin and other folks on board has really advanced the standards, and surely, the standards are catching up with the current real life progress of that assistive technology. We still have a long way to go in terms of making sure that kiosks and ATMs are fully accessible, and so forth. But the other thing that I want to emphasize that I'm quite proud of the staff and the board for doing is that when creating standards, it's really hard to read and fully understand the standards of paper. So over the past 10 years, the staff have really emphasized and developed these videos that really put the standards into action, and that has made a role of difference for the greater community, fully understanding how do we apply these standards in real life environments. And so I think the board, dashboard, is very forward thinking, and so it's been the greatest honor of serving in this capacity as a public member, and I look forward to all the new public members simply progressing the work that we've done for the past 10 years. So I thank all of you, and I will miss a lot of the folks serving as public members, and thankfully based in DC, so I can see the export staff whenever I want to. So there you go. Take care, guys, and I hope to cross paths with you in the very near future. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you for your service. The next person, and I think this is the only other person we have from the outgoing board members, is Mr. Howard Rosenblum. Howard, would you like to make some remarks?
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Howard Rosenblum. I represent the National Association of the Deaf, and I want to extend my appreciation to you for recognition of the services we've thus far provided. And I also joined the board in 2011 and have served alongside Chris and Matt in that capacity. It has been a pleasure to serve under both the tenure of David Kaposi and Sachin Pavasran. You've both been exceptional leaders, and it's been a remarkable experience working with all of you and with the staff. So there have been people who have come and gone since my tenure started, and every single one of them has been exceptional and have worked to help us understand the different elements of the working of the Access Board, from budgets to regulatory processes to rulemaking, and all of the work therefore included. I'd like to especially recognise Tim Cregan for his work on the Frontier Committee, and I was the chair of that committee. So he was invaluable in assisting to recognise emerging technologies for the Frontier Committee's work. So I, like Chris and Matt, have served 11 years, and I've seen board members and staff members and leadership come and go. Overall, I've seen remarkable growth, and it's been wonderful to understand the Access Board's process and to see how it works in the terms of regulatory approval and what that all is engaged with, and to also look at the spaces where we're looking to make accessibility vastly improved. And Access Board has actually been instrumental in my outside role in many ways as well, especially when we look at the Access Board and its recognition of DEIA efforts under the federal government with the executive order. So many thanks to all of you for all of that you have contributed to me. I hope I have contributed likewise to your endeavors. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Howard. I appreciate your service as well. I don't believe Mark Guthrie or Pat Cannon is on. If I'm wrong on this, please let me know, Rose or others. So those are the three of the 5 outgoing board members that we heard from. I do also want to make a couple of quick notes. We have 2 board members who have joined. I just want to recognize Alison Burkhoff from HHS, and also Deborah Ryan, public member from Massachusetts, who has joined us since the roll call. With that, I want to take a few minutes. I know we're running short on time, so I'll try to keep my remarks brief, but I do want to share some of the activities that we've been involved in. So we heard about some of the executive orders that some of the previous board members have mentioned. So I just want to touch on some of the work we have been involved at the agency for these executive orders. So to start off with EO 14035, which is the diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility executive order. Every agency was asked to submit their strategic plan by end of March, which Access Board did submit our plan as well. The unique thing about this executive order is the role that the Access Board has been asked to provide a service to the federal government in how to ensure accessibility of physical spaces. Since the Access Board is the one that enforces the Architecture Barriers Act, we play a unique role in making sure the federal agencies do have a good understanding of the ABA and how to make that make all the facilities that the federal government uses accessible. So we have been engaging with federal agencies over the last several months on how we can best support them in the work that they are doing to make it, to ensure ABA accessibility. We have posted a recommendation and resource guide on our website that agencies can use. We have received a lot of requests from agencies for trainings on ABA, which continues to happen, and there are several more coming down the pipe so that we can provide our technical expertise on ABA to ensure the accessibility. We are also working with GSA and other partners on the digital accessibility component as well, to ensure that digital accessibility is not forgotten in the conversation. ABA is the primary role that the Access Board is playing under this EO, but with our expertise in the digital space, we continue to push that piece forward as well. The other one I want to touch on is the EO 13985, Advancing Racial Equity. So we submitted our plan in January, and OMB has approved our plan, and that plan can be viewed on our website. It was posted in April. Some of the plans are working with underserved communities to make sure that the services that we provide are reaching to those communities, whether it's Black and Brown individuals, whether it's people with disabilities in areas that our services has been outreaching in the past. but also professionals in the space, in the communities, in these underserved communities that have been heard about us. So we've been trying to target organizations and entities that work in the spaces that especially serve underserved communities. So we're building those new relationships so that we can continue to get the word about the Access Board and also provide our services to all these communities. We're also trying to figure out how to best use our social media to outreach to these communities as well. So we have brought in a new public affairs specialist, Phil Brada, who joined us in this role in February. He joined the Access Board as a technical writer about a couple of years ago, but now his role is primarily focusing on public affairs and outreach so that we can really target those communities that the Access Board has not worked extensively in the past. The last executive order I want to touch on is the EO 13175 that is working with tribal nations. We are partnering with other federal agencies who are working closely with tribal nations and to ensure that we are able to share our technical assistance, our trainings, and also to ensure the federal spaces in tribal lands are accessible, and how can individuals living in tribal lands report on any inaccessibility that they face in federal spaces that are on their lands. So we are trying to raise the awareness of ABA in those communities as well, because it is important for us to make sure that the federal spaces that are on tribal lands is accessible as well, but also give the tools to the individuals living in tribal lands to file the complaints if they do come across any of these accessibility barriers. I'll briefly touch on our public affairs, that we've been working on. So we have various channels that we've been pushing out different activities of the Access Board. We have our standard news email blast that we send all our different news items. We have our social media channels, that's Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook, and also YouTube. I strongly encourage those who are on this call, if you're not following us on any of these channels, please do sign up, but also encourage others who would find the information that we are sharing valuable. So please do look out for our various social media channels. We've seen a significant increase in the last year in our social media channels, thanks to the hard work of our public affairs person and others who've been complementing the work of our outreach. Our website is definitely the main source of information that we get most of our traffic. We have gone through a lot of changes over the last couple of years. I do want to point out one particular change that recently took place. There's a new tab that we have added called Advancing Access. This tab includes active rulemaking that the board is involved in right now. Any updates that we have on our executive orders is included in this page as well. And any completed research can be found on this new tab that was introduced. So please visit our website for the information that we have for all the various activities. Last, about a month and a half ago, we submitted a congressional justification. We have posted that on our website. We have also met with appropriation staffers to better explain our justification, and we continue to respond to inquiries that are coming from Congress, from different offices on the Hill on various accessibility related items that are being introduced in legislation. We continue to have conversation, and it's great to note that Congress is reaching out to the Access Board to get our opinion and our technical assistance on various accessibility related matters. One of the activities that the Access Board does is our out-of-town meetings, and this year our plan is to have an out-of-town meeting in Philadelphia. This is going to be happening in September. The dates are September 13th, 14th, and 15th. Myself, Phil Braddock, the public affairs person, and Francis Spiegel, our attorney from the Office of General Counsel, were able to visit Philadelphia to put together a fairly good plan on how we can learn from our trip in Philadelphia, outreaching to communities that we historically haven't reached out to in the past, but also trying to learn about topics that as an agency we could be learning more from. One of the topics we are trying to learn more about is how to work with a neurodiverse community. So there are several meetings that we are organizing right now for this particular meeting that's going to be happening in Philadelphia. I want to give a couple of quick updates about rulemaking. One date I want to put forward, if you haven't seen already, is tomorrow we have a informational gathering meeting on our low surface transfer height for medical diagnostic equipment. This is a meeting on Zoom that's virtual meeting happening on Zoom tomorrow from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern. You need to register for this meeting if you're interested. Please go to our news page on our website, and you should find the announcement under the news page tab. So please sign up and share with others who would want to share any information about this important topic. We have also been approached by Department of Transportation with the new legislation that was passed on infrastructure. We are working really close with DOT on a best practice for EV charging stations, electric vehicle charging stations. So our hope is to have some sort of best practice available to complement the work that DOT is doing with all the new EV charging stations that we are seeing pop up everywhere around the country. Public rights of way is another rule. Our goal is to finalize this rule as soon as possible. We are getting towards the end here. We are in conversation with our colleagues in Department of Justice and Transportation to ensure the work is proceeding, and we are also waiting on finishing up our regulatory assessment, and the work on preamble will be continuing as well. Our hope is to finalize this rule hopefully by the end of this year. The Access Board plans to start a conversation, or we intend to propose an ANPR on self-service transaction machines. That should be coming out sometime this year. This is a rule that we have been wanting to get started for some time now, so that is something to look out for. There should be more information coming about this ANPR on self-service transaction machine later this year as well. Couple of quick comments on our ABA enforcement. This year we have received 84 complaints on accessibility barriers in federal facilities, out of which 68 were closed. 11 of these that were closed were as it resulted after corrective actions. Mario Damiani, our compliance officer who leads this effort, has been working closely with our federal partners to ensure that our ABA program is moving forward, but also working on how we can best collaborate in getting to some of this accessibility barriers before a complaint comes forward. So we're having different conversations on how to address some of these barriers and not just have to wait for the complaints to come through, so that the federal agencies can proactively do the work that needs to be done to remove some of these barriers. With our technical assistance, so far we have received this year about 2,500 inquiries. We'll continue to build our knowledge management system so that we are able to better respond to the inquiries that we get from the public. We have started working on our guides, and the board is currently reviewing the guides on science, and we're going to start working on the guides on recreation, which is also going to be underway coming soon in the future. With training, so far this year we have conducted over 44 webinars and trainings. We continue to have our monthly built environment training and bi-monthly Section 508 training. Those information is on our website if you would like to sign on to those webinars. It's a different topic every month. But board members, board staff also get requested for various other trainings. I did mention earlier about the requests we're getting from federal entities for ABA, but there are other parts of our guides and standards that board staff continue to provide trainings on. And with public rights of way hopefully coming to a close this year, there'll be more trainings that I know our staff will be involved when it comes to public rights of way. Many of our staff have been requested to present in different conferences. I had the pleasure to keynote the American Foundation for the Blind conference earlier this month, and our staff continues to provide the service either by in-person training or virtual trainings going forward. Just a quick number for the number of audience we've reached so far. So far this fiscal year, we have reached over 9,000 members of the 9,000 attendees so far in just trainings and webinars so far. So that's the conclusion of my report of the activities that we've been involved in the last few months. And that's all I have to report. And I appreciate the work of our staff. There's a lot of behind the scenes activities that goes on, which is critical to the functioning of the agency. And we have a fantastic staff that takes the mission of the Access Board very seriously and ensure accessibility. With that, I'm going to turn the time over to our Vice Chair, Mr. Fairback. I know our Chairwoman, she had to step away for another engagement that she had at the top of the hour. So, Mr. Chairman, time's yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pavin. We appreciate that great report regarding our successes over the last few months and the last few years. Also, personal note, I want to thank all of the outgoing members of the board who I was honored to serve with over the last 5 or 6 years. Great people, and I know that our new members will be well suited to be prepared to take these good people's footsteps and move our organization forward. That being said, it's now time for the standing committee reports, which we always do in our meetings. And the first meeting report is going to be the Technical Programs Committee, and that's going to be handled by my colleague, Deborah Ryan, and supported by Bill Botten. Deborah?
Thank you, Chair, Vice Chair Fehrbach. This is Bill Botten. I'm the staff liaison. Unfortunately, Deb Ryan is not going to be able to be with us for the committee report. I too just personally want to thank those outgoing board members for their service, and what a pleasure it was to work with all of you. So thank you, Vice Chair. The Technical Programs Committee met on Monday afternoon and received a second quarter FY22 report for the Technical Assistance and Training Program. Technical Assistance Coordinator Scott Windley provided the quarterly totals for technical assistance inquiries received by both the built environment and Section 508 accessibility specialists by phone and email. Additionally, Scott provided information on the development of the board's technical assistance guides, which you heard Sachin just briefly mention. As the training coordinator, I provided the quarterly totals for trainings, which you just heard Sachin provide. Over 44 trainings provided to over 9,000 attendees were provided by board staff, mostly virtual, a few in person. Additionally, I provided an overview of the 2 board-sponsored webinar series and would like to highlight just 2 upcoming board-sponsored webinars so that you can take advantage and join these very important webinars. Remember, all the webinars are free. And the first one that I'd like to just highlight is our Section 508 webinar that is going to occur this May 24th from 1 to 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time. It's called Accessible Data Visualization, Addressing Barriers and Implementing Section 508 Solutions. And then finally, I'd just like to highlight the upcoming Built Environment webinar, and that is the Accessible Golf and Miniature Golf Facilities, and that'll be June 2nd from 2:30 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And as Sachin stated, the board continues to work on executive order on DEIA, and we continue to work with our federal partners to provide trainings in relationship to that executive order. And we have many in the upcoming months with other federal agencies. If you're looking for an entire list of the trainings that were completed over the last couple of months and quarters, that was available in the board's packet. At this time, I'll take any questions or turn it back over to the Vice Chair.
Any questions? Very good, Bill. Excellent report. We'll now move on to the Planning and Evaluation Committee, chaired by Karen Tamley, supported again by Francis Spiegel. Karen?
Great, thank you so much. The Planning and Evaluation Committee met yesterday afternoon. We heard from staff on logistics regarding the July board meeting in Washington, D.C., which is expected to be the first in-person meeting since March of 2020. Staff was also briefed, then briefed the board on the plans for our 2022 out-of-town meeting, which will be held on September 13th through September 15th in Philadelphia. And we had an initial discussion regarding the location of the 2024 out-of-town meeting. Finally, staff briefed new board members on the committee of the board ahead of our election of committee chairs and vice chairs and committee appointments. That concludes my report. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Chair Tamley. We're now going to move on to the budget report, and that's going to be shared by Ms. Karen Breitmeyer, chair of that committee, and again supported by Jeff Sargent. Karen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm doing this report in honor of Matt, who has been doing the budget committee reports for so many years, I kind of can't remember. So I'm going to hopefully meet his standards. So the budget committee met day before yesterday, and President Biden signed the fiscal year 2022 Consolidated Appropriations Act on March 15th, providing $9.75 million to the Access Board. The Access Board is currently spending within its appropriated amount, with 43% expended as of April 28th and 56.7% of the fiscal year expired. Staff will be obligating funds for several contracts in the third and fourth quarters, including a regulatory assessment, IT support services, and administrative support services. The president included $9.85 million in his fiscal year 2023 budget for the Access Board. An Access Board staff met with congressional staffers in April, and the staff provided positive feedback. The fiscal year 2024 budget proposals will be due to OMB in early September. OMB will be providing agencies with additional information about the president's priorities and cost assumptions over the coming months. And that concludes my report.
Thank you very much, Ms. Breitmeyer. Sounds like a good fiscal situation to be in. And I know Matt is very pleased with your execution of that report. So thank you very much. All right. And now our next report is going to be on the frontier issues. And that's going to be presented by Tim Keegan. Is that correct, Tim?
Actually, we are going to have Alexis, who's our new board member, take the lead on this one.
All right, very good. Thank you. Alexis, I'm sorry. Please lead on.
No problem. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to present this report. During our board meeting, we received a presentation by a group called Astro Access. And this was under the Frontier Committee issues. Astro Access focuses on advancing disability inclusion in space exploration, as well as the STEM fields, including science, technology, engineering, and math. We had two speakers, Anna Vogler and Sina Bahram. They both spoke about their work, including a very recent historical parabolic flight that was done on October 7th of last year with 12 ambassadors of people from many backgrounds, veterans, students, athletes, researchers, all with a variety of disabilities. They did some exploration on that flight as to what it might be like in terms of physical accessibility, communication accessibility, and other issues that might arise during space exploration. They're planning additional flights in this year with, I believe, the same group of ambassadors who will be continuing to use their platforms to promote and advocate for opening disability access within the STEM fields. If any of you are interested in learning more about this organization, you can check them out at astroaccess.org. If there are no other questions, then this concludes my report.
Thank you very much, Chair Cashin. We appreciate your efforts, and that was a fantastic report that we got to hear about this morning. So thank you for sharing the highlights of that. Next up, we have the Ad Hoc Committee on Design Guidance, and that's Karen Breitmeyer again. And Karen is going to be staffed by Mr. Windley, Scott Windley. So Karen, please.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. The Design Guidance Ad Hoc Committee met on Tuesday afternoon. Staff presented the past work that has been done and listed the technical assistance guides covering chapters 1 through 6 of the ADA standards and ABA standards, as well as the animations. Staff also encouraged the committee to comment on the guide that is currently under review. Staff then went page by page through the sign guide, which is currently under the board's review. For those of us who are charged with reviewing that document, please get any comments on that guide to Scott Windley by May 18th. His email address is windley@access-board.gov. And that concludes my report.
Thank you again, Karen. We appreciate the report. We're now going to be moving on to the federal agency updates. And we are just going to ask for people to raise their hand or jump in from the federal agencies that are here today that serve us so well in DC. So if anybody has any comments, not required, we'd love to hear it from you. And we will move on to start off with Katie Kale. Katie?
Hi, Greg. Thank you so much. Before I get started, wanted to, just like everyone else, thank Chris and Matthew and Howard for their work on the board. I also want to welcome all of the new folks. I'm excited to work with you in this capacity. For those who have not met me before, I am Katie Kale. I am my pronouns are she, her. I'm a woman with long, bold, brownish blonde hair, wearing glasses, and I am white. I am the Deputy Administrator of the U.S. General Services Administration. And we are very excited about the work that we're doing around some of the items that Sachin mentioned earlier. We have issued our GSA Equity Action Plan and our DEIA Strategic Plan in support of EO 13985 and EO 14035. Some of the things that I wanted to highlight include our public building actions that focus on community impact throughout the federal footprint, which will be advancing accessibility and diversity in design and construction. We have issued a request for information to design and construction industries to survey what the current state of DEI practices are, and that RFI closes on May 12th. We are also going to have an upcoming PBS, that's Public Building Services Customer Forum, on June 14th through 16th, which will have content focused on DEIA and how federal agencies can be deliberate in requesting accessibility features beyond simply compliance in the design process with GSA. We are also working internally on, as well as externally, on improving digital accessibility and user experience in technology beyond just 504 and 508 compliance. And internally, we have programs to enhance federal employment experience for people with disabilities, including creating a GSA Persons with Disabilities Special Emphasis Program within the last year, and partnering with them for events, raising awareness, as well as improving the hiring process for mission critical occupations and higher grade levels. So we're really excited about the work that we're doing at GSA and the work that we do in partnering with the Access Board. So if there are no questions, then I will turn it back to Greg.
Thank you very, very much, Katie. We appreciate that. The next agency that we have up is John Day. Mr. Day.
Thank you, Greg. Just a couple of updates from DOT.
we are working on a draft NPRM to update the Access Board's or to adopt the Access Board's updated final rule on buses and vans into DOT's regulations. So that's in the works. And comments on the accessible restrooms on single aisle aircraft. The comment period for that rule will be closing soon. So if you haven't commented, please do so before the deadline. Sachin mentioned the guidance on charging stations for electric vehicles. And I also believe that we owe Access Board staff some comments on your PROAG final rule this week. So we'll get those to you as soon as we can. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. I appreciate that. Next, we have Rex Pace, sorry, has his hand up. Rex.
Yes, thank you. My name is Rex Pace. I'm with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and just a little bit of a follow-up on the training reporting you've heard today. On July 7th, our agency will be doing a joint webinar with the Access Board. This is part of the Access Board's regular webinar series. And of course, we'll be addressing accessible design requirements for housing. And it'll be a good webinar for those of you who are trying to figure out how the various different federal mandates overlap with each other. So put that on your calendar, and I believe the Access Board will put some more information about that event up on their website. But we're very much looking forward to it and appreciate the opportunity to partner with the Access Board. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rex. Appreciate that. Do I have any other members I'm not seeing who I would like to?
Hi, Greg. This is Nathan Cunningham from the Department of Labor.
Thank you, Nathan. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in here. I am representing Assistant Secretary Williams, who's chair of the Access Board for the Department of Labor, and wanted to share some of the work that we're doing inside the department and also with an external initiative that we fund called the Partnership on Employment and Accessible Technology, or PEAT. Inside the Department of Labor, some of my colleagues have been really involved in strategic planning around the DEIA executive order and looking at opportunities to advance disability inclusion through leadership positions in the department. And then I'm also managing a Section 508 compliance work group inside the department. And I'm really excited to be involved with the Access Board in this because we're noticing a lot of federal agencies using similar technology-based systems. So we're doing a review of some of the systems that we're using inside the Department of Labor and trying to look at ways to enhance accessibility practices, conduct training for staff on document accessibility so that we're kind of seeding that knowledge throughout the agency and it doesn't kind of go by the wayside as a result. The other thing I wanted to mention, the Partnership on Employment and Accessible Technology, I think some of my colleagues are here in the meeting as well. We foster collaborations with technology companies, makers, developers, designers, people who are building technology tools in order to make sure that they're accessible for people with disabilities. And because we're the Department of Labor, we're focused on the workplace. So breaking down barriers to employment for people with disabilities through accessible technology. So we have a lot of resources there on digital accessibility. It was great to hear from Assistant Attorney General Kristen Clark earlier on website accessibility guidance from DOJ that we've linked to on the PEAT website. And then in the past couple of years, we've also focused a lot on emerging technology areas. So I'm interested in exploring this with the Frontier Committee and anyone in the Access Board who's involved in that. Two areas, one is automation in the hiring process or the use of automated tools throughout the employment lifecycle. So making sure that automated tools are not causing bias in the hiring process, unintentionally excluding candidates with disabilities through matching, resume screening, video interviewing. And PEAT has put out a resource, an AI and disability inclusion toolkit. And we're also working with partners, including an international organization called For Humanity, on developing an audit framework that's going to be inclusive of people with disabilities. And then the other area is XR, extended reality tools. We're really involved in a community called XR Access, which includes universities, includes makers of XR tools, These are virtual reality, augmented reality, and mixed reality tools. And we're looking at this as the next frontier for workplace technology, especially as we're shifting to hybrid collaboration much more, and wanting to make sure these tools are accessible from the start, not thinking about retrofitting. So we've put out other resources on inclusive, immersive, hybrid workplace tools, and this is one of our ongoing efforts that I'd like to keep the board updated as we proceed. Thank you for letting me jump in here.
No, thank you, Nathan. We appreciate it. Good report. Anybody else that from the federal side that has a report or a comment to make to the board today? All right, thank you. We're now at the new business portion of our meeting. Does any member or liaison have a report or new business that they wish to give to the board at this time? Questions and other matters, simple matters, can also be brought forward if they have any questions for the board or for the our staff as we move forward on the new business aspect of today's meeting. All right, seeing Doug, thank you all. It is now time to adjourn the meeting. The next meeting of the United States Access Board will take place Monday through Wednesday, July 11th through 13th, in Suite 800 in our building. We will be going at this time in person. We'll have our protocols put in place, and that information will be shared by our staff as we get closer to the July meeting. Everyone also knows that the public information on low transfer suffering, I'm so very sorry, low transfer suffer height for the medical diagnostic equipment will take place service-side Thursday, May 12th. So if you want to be a part of that, that begins at 2 p.m. And you can find the Zoom access on the webinar on our website. So please know that that is available this tomorrow on the 12th. All right. Anything further? Any additional information or questions? If not, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Thank you, Karen. Is there a second?
Seconded.
Moved in second. Matter is taken, and we stand adjourned. Thank you all, and we'll see you in Washington, D.C. or on the remote in a couple months. Have a good one. Thank you.
And this is Rosemary with the Access Board. Thank you to Amy and Jackie and Beth, our captioner and interpreters. We will see everybody in July. We are